Welcome to Back in Crime, a podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers. I'm Stewart Fillmore, retired FBI agent.
And I'm Todd Hiles, retired Secret Service agent. In this podcast, we cover cases we worked and some we wish we had.
As lifelong street agents, we were where the rubber met the road.
While the big guys were doing press conferences, we were interviewing the criminals.
And because of that, we can take you inside these cases
And under the crime scene tape.
This is Back in Crime.
Today, we're going to head east, Stewart.
East? Well, east for us, Todd.
East for us. We're going to cross a couple state lines to talk about today's crime.
Okay.
And I promise you, in this episode, we're going to go into the mind of an investigator.
Well, that's what we always try to do, but this is really going to be special tonight.
And I think the information that we're going to talk about today, you're only going to hear it on this podcast.
Absolutely.
But before we begin, let's get some of the housekeeping chores out of the way.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the business.
Yeah, very important stuff.
That is, if you're listening to this podcast, please follow, share, hit the subscribe button, rate, review, leave us comments.
Yeah, this helps us out tremendously.
The Texas Crime Travelers have a TikTok page that you can follow. We have an Instagram account and a YouTube channel. Now, we have some plans for some great content on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we really do.
But
some
our producer
cool stuff coming up.
Our producer Grace says that we can't spend any money without any sponsors or subscribers.
Yep.
So people, please get over there and hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we run a tight ship here, so we need help.
And also, you can buy some of our merchandise at TexasCrimeTravelers.com.
And we are actually wearing some of our merch today.
And let me just add that is a nice looking hat you have.
I really like this hat. I really do.
And so get over to that TexasCrimeTravelers.com merch page.
Awesome.
Now we got the business side out of the way, and let's enjoy the show as we go under the crime scene tape. And I promise, in this episode, one of us has a personal association with this case.
I can't wait.
I mentioned earlier that we're heading east. We're going to travel to the state of Alabama.
Alabama, okay.
And I think most people probably refer to this region of the United States as the South.
Well, I think most people refer to it that way, Todd, because it is the South.
And historically, the South, since the 1960s, had a reputation of a high sense of racial tension.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of racial tensions, in that time in the 60s.
And we're going to be talking about Birmingham, Alabama, from 1955 to 1963. There were 21 separate bombings of churches, buildings, businesses.
That's terrible.
But however, prior to this case that we're going to talk about in this episode, there had never been any fatalities in association with these bombings.
Yeah, just bombings of buildings to either kind of try to scare people.
Put fear in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Fear. And there were so many in Birmingham at this time that Birmingham got the nickname Bombingham.
Yeah. So on September 15th, 1963, it was a quiet and calm Sunday morning in Birmingham, Alabama. At around 10:21 a.m., a bundle of dynamite, which had been placed under the stairs in the back corner of the 16th Street Baptist Church, exploded. The church was a key civil rights meeting place and had been a frequent target of bomb threats. The explosion tore through a wall in the church near the basement, where 5 children were changing into choir robes to join the adult choir for the service. Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, who were all age 14, and 11-year-old Carol Denise McNair were killed in the blast. Addie's sister, Sarah, survived but lost her right eye. 16 others were injured inside the church. This clearly was a racially motivated act of terrorism.
And immediately, the FBI office in Birmingham launches an investigation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you look back at newspaper articles around this time, the FBI is involved in a lot of these bombings down there.
Yeah.
But yet they're not making any arrests.
Yeah, it's a weird time because, as we mentioned earlier, you have the racial tensions, but really they weren't having much success in prosecuting these cases.
And a lot of these articles are very critical of the FBI, and they're actually blaming them for being incompetent for not being able to solve these.
Yeah, and again, a lot of cases were solved, but when they went to trial, juries would not convict people on these things.
But following the bombing here, the director of the FBI at the time is J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover.
And just within like an hour of this bombing, you know, he sends out a memo to all offices of the FBI.
Yeah, oh yeah, top priority. It was a big deal. I mean, this is a horrific thing.
And in this memo that he sends out, he gives them instructions. He tells all the offices, every known Klansman or a person that's a member of some of these hate groups,
Yep.
he wants them interviewed.
Absolutely.
To their whereabouts of where they are at the time of this bombing.
Yeah, and also I would imagine too to go out and talk to all the informants. Let's round up and get any piece of information we can on this thing.
And he wants all the findings of all these interviews. He wants it all in a report to headquarters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all offices, you know, they're told daily they have to report to the headquarters the number of interviews that they've done, what information came out of these interviews, and how many interviews they're planned yet to do.
Yes.
This director, he's determined to solve this case.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it's just such a horrific thing that you just can't even imagine how bad this is, with 4 young women, you know, just changing into choir robes on a Sunday morning, are brutally killed. Brutally killed. It's if there were ever a time and a place where the full resources of the FBI needed to be applied,
it's now.
This is it.
This is it. Now, looking through the FBI file on this case, that first memo, or maybe it's the second memo that goes out that day, and again, I call it his instructions. He's instructing them what to do, but he ends it by stating, no interview should be conducted after dusk unless absolutely necessary and dictated by pertinent information.
Okay. Now, what was that about?
You know, I read that a couple times, and I was like, is it that there's so much fear at night of other bombings going on that he doesn't want to send FBI agents out to some of these locations?
Okay.
Maybe it's more, I guess, safe in the daylight. I don't know. I never saw that before.
That's interesting, because I don't once ever in my FBI career remember having an instruction to not do any interviews at night.
Dusk.
You know,
At
especially on a high priority case. I mean, I can remember, knocking on doors at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Depending on the circumstance and the situation, trying to get information or locate a witness, whatever. It was not something you would wait on. So that's really interesting. I'd like to know really what was behind that.
Well, yeah, like I said, when I read that, I thought that was really unique that he put that time in there like that.
Interesting.
And also within the same day, he's going to order agents from other field offices around the country to start driving to Birmingham.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And also,
I don't know how big the Birmingham office would have been in those days. And in fact, was there might not have even been an office in Birmingham, and it would have been maybe from Atlanta, and that would have been covered out of Atlanta, something like that. But there definitely would not have been enough agents immediately in that area to do the work that needed to be done. So yeah, you're going to bring in a whole lot of people.
Right. And that same day, they're going to use an Air Force jet to fly people from the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. down to Birmingham.
Yeah, because when you think of a bombing, you just think that, just utter destruction. But you would be amazed at how much can be reconstructed from a bombing scene. And many times they can almost fully reassemble the bomb. It's in pieces, and the tiniest little piece can make a big difference. So yeah, you would want people experiencing that and knowing what to look for on the scene.
Some agents that are going to go down to Birmingham this first day, they're going to spend the next 3 months in Birmingham.
Oh yeah,
and never leave.
Yeah.
I always heard this story from a guy that his dad was an FBI agent at the JFK assassination that day. And says that his dad was in another field office in another state, and after that assassination, gets called into their briefing room, and they're supposed to count off by twos. So everybody's 1, 2, 1, 2, and he says, "Okay, everybody who just said 1, get in your car, get to Dallas.
Yeah,
all you twos, go home, pack a suitcase, then go to the guy that was a number 1 on your right, go to his house and pick up a suitcase for him, and then you head to Dallas.
Yes. Yep.
And he said that his dad left that briefing room in his G-Ride,
Yeah.
drove to Dallas, and said never came back. That the next years later, he was still in Dallas working that case. That his mom had to sell the house up there where they were living, pack up him and his brother, and they moved to Dallas because his dad got transferred to Dallas.
And just for our listeners' sake, Todd threw in a saying there among federal law enforcement. He said the G-Ride. That's just what we refer to the, I guess, the government-issued car that we would drive.
So by 10 o'clock that night of the bombing, the assistant director of the FBI, he reaches out to the assistant attorney general of the United States and says, the FBI has entered this investigation with no holds barred.
Okay. So, all hands on deck. Yeah. And again, I completely and utterly justified, if not outright, needed.
Right.
And so, demanded.
Exactly. And so when all these agents are getting now to Birmingham, they're going to start conducting witness interviews. They're going to start canvassing neighborhoods. They're trying to cultivate witnesses that may have seen something.
Yeah, you want to try to encourage people to call in, and in these kind of things too. It'll generate a lot of phone calls to the office, and quite frankly, a lot of them are just maybe just short of crank calls, or it's people that are maybe they're genuinely trying to help, and they think they might have seen something, and I would say probably 90% of the time it's not relevant, but it's that 10% or less that do call in that have valid information that you do not want to miss. So you have to take all those calls seriously, and to follow up on each one.
And I think a lot of agents are just going to go to the crime scene and, like you said, start to process that crime scene.
That's where your initial leads are going to be. That's where you're going to start from.
And the governor of Alabama, he sends up about 150 state troopers to Birmingham to help with this. They're looking at stolen vehicle police reports that might have come in the days before. And like you said, there's just this tremendous amount of anonymous phone calls coming in with tips.
Yep. I remember one time after 9/11 in 2001, same thing. We were just bombarded with calls, and so some of us would, that's kind of initially what we were just trying to do was just field all the phone calls. And I remember a guy called in 2 or 3 times, and he said that he claimed that he was a psychic, and that there was going to be another attack, and the attack was going to come somewhere in Houston, Texas, and it was going to be with and the person driving was in a green pickup truck. And so I could tell from his voice that he was sincere, that he really was trying to help, and he wanted to offer this, in good faith. But, I just had to be honest with the guy. I said, what do you want me to do with a green pickup truck in Houston, Texas? Right. Okay, we don't have the resources. I appreciate you trying to help, but at the moment, it's just, there's nothing we can do with it. So thanks for your time. And you had to move on to the next one. So yeah, there's a lot of those kind of calls, and that happens.
And when I reviewed the FBI file on this case, a lot of these tipsters have this information, and it's redacted. So I was always kind of interesting, like, what did they say that they redacted out of there?
I have an opinion on that, because I just, it's a weird hobby. I guess I'm pretty nerdy, but, I like to read a lot of these old files. And, so a lot of stuff that you still, to this day, is redacted. I'm not a fan of the redactions. I think, barring maybe some personal information, of someone that's still alive, I think it ought to just all be open. I don't think there should be any redactions whatsoever,
But then I wonder, though, if that would slow down a tipster calling in to report maybe his neighbor. Something suspicious at his neighbor, because he doesn't want his neighbor a year later to find out, hey, you called the FBI on me.
True.
And he might have had nothing to do with it.
Yes. So I can, and I can understand that, and that's one side of the argument, but for the most part, I lean way more toward the transparency side than, that your neighbor's going to get mad at you for calling in.
Right. Yeah. probably true. So in Birmingham now, they've set up a surveillance at the church, and I guess the idea is that the people responsible for this might drive by just to see what damage was done.
Sure,
like
absolutely.
that.
Yep.
You know, they're also trying to see who may scratch that, Grace. So back in Birmingham, they set up surveillance at the church.
Yes.
And it's this idea that the bombers might come back to see what damage they've done.
I mean, you know, and that's a very valid thing is, you know, criminals, as weird as this sounds to normal people, you know, they want to take credit for what they've done. And so, you know, driving by and actually looking at their work, that's how they would look at it.
The arsonist
Yeah,
who's watching the building burn.
Yep.
I think in some of these instructions from Hoover, he's going to say a week later he still wants surveillance done on the church just so that the FBI can identify maybe a delivery truck that goes by at a certain time on that Sunday, or if people were walking to work.
Well, yeah, you want to see patterns because you might also be able to identify, you know, a witness, a delivery truck that regularly goes by, and hey, let's go talk to this delivery guy. Not that necessarily he did it, but you know, if he has a regular route that goes by here, there's no telling what he saw. Let's go talk to him.
You're right. And so really within a short amount of time, the FBI developed potential suspects in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 4 people. One was Robert Chambliss, Bobby Frank Cherry, Herman Frank Cash, and Thomas Blanton Jr.
Yeah.
And they're all supposedly members of the KKK.
Right. Todd, I don't think there was any doubt, was there? I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, at that time, it was you know, membership in the Ku Klux Klan was way more open, you know, than it is now. It's really kind of an underground thing now. At that time, I mean, people openly took pride in it.
Right. So this Robert Chambliss guy, in fact, he has the nickname Dynamite Bob.
Dynamite Bob. Wow.
And hours after the bombing, Chambliss will have a nephew who's a Birmingham police officer. And he's going to go to Chambliss's house because he suspects that Chambliss was involved in this.
The nephew, then automatically, I mean, his first thought is this Dynamite Bob doing this?
Right. And now he's going to go over there under the idea that he needs to borrow a shotgun from his uncle, but he wants to check on his uncle's whereabouts that morning.
Yeah.
In fact, the police officer goes into work later that day, and he tells 2 police officers that he thinks his uncle had something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, he tells 2 FBI agents the same thing. I think my uncle has something to do with this.
Okay. Yeah. Good for him.
So within just really a less than a couple weeks from this bombing, the state police are going to arrest Chambliss for possession of dynamite.
Okay.
And in late September or early October of 1963, he's going to be convicted of possession of dynamite. Now, he's going to be out on a $300 bond as he appeals this.
Right.
I think maybe a month later, he's acquitted of all charges.
Do we know how much dynamite he had that they arrested him on?
I did not see that in any of the reports there.
Yeah. Just basically for illegal possession of dynamite.
Right. And again, after he's acquitted of this, he has this appeal and he's acquitted. And this causes a lot of friction between the FBI and the state police at that time. Because the FBI is saying, hey, he's a suspect for this murder, for this bombing, and you guys went around kind of behind our back and arrested him for possession of dynamite.
Yeah, kind of probably a misdemeanor, offense anyway.
And this whole, this eventual acquittal that he gets, that really damages the FBI case against him.
Yeah, exactly, because, the argument being if you now charge him in this church bombing, and he's
been acquitted.
Dynamite Bob there's already been acquitted. It does. It would certainly be in Bob's favor on that one.
And the FBI has jurisdiction in bombings at this time, but it's only limited to 5 years.
Yeah, statute of limitations. Yeah.
So in 1968, the FBI closes their case down there without making any arrests.
So, and the other thing, too, is, murder is a state crime and does not have a statute of limitations. So that can just go on forever.
Right. So when the FBI closes their case, this is another time that, the director Hoover, he's heavily criticized for this.
Yeah.
The FBI says, hey, we gave you names, we just didn't make the arrests.
I would say that, probably the internal argument or the thought being at the time was, odds are we'll have jury nullification in this, and that is that the jury is just not going, which is primarily going to be consisting of all whites, that they're just not going to convict another white man in this bombing, no matter how horrific it might have been. At that time, white juries just did not convict Klansmen. So
you're exactly right.
So the thing is, if you bring this prosecution against him and you lose, you lost forever. There's no going back.
And this is what Hoover has been quoted as saying years later, by saying no jury in Birmingham is going to convict these guys.
Yes.
It's not going to happen. And also some of the surveillance techniques that the FBI were using at that time, they were not admissible in court.
Yeah.
And here we're probably talking about wiretaps on telephones.
Yeah.
They had installed listening devices in vehicles and inside houses.
Right.
At the time in 1963, these are all new techniques.
It's all new techniques, and a lot of people would argue, oh well, that was all illegal stuff they did. As far as wiretapping and that kind of thing, now there's very, very strict rules on how it's done, the level of approvals you have to have from the courts. It's a very, very structured process now. In those days, it did not have that level of structure, and frankly, there were a lot of abuses of it that just shouldn't have happened.
That's a good point.
And so that ultimately that's what led to all the processes and approvals that we have today. But at that time, it could be argued, they were out just breaking the law themselves, the FBI. And I'm not sure that's, I guess maybe that's technically true, but in the sense that they were trying to solve this crime, and you have this new technology, and there's not necessarily case law on it yet. That could be. It has to be judged really more or less in the context of the times rather than what we would do to what's appropriate today.
And maybe at the time, since this is a new technique that they're doing stuff, they don't want it out in court that they can wiretap.
That's another thing that you balance is, do you give away an investigative technique that maybe the criminals don't know about? And,
right.
And if they do know about it, they'll be able to avoid the crime in the future. So is it something you don't want to necessarily give away? So it's not as cut and dried as just the FBI's breaking into people's houses and randomly putting listening devices in there. I promise you that was not happening, but it could be a sticky area where, well, even though this is your suspect, you had probable cause to believe he's one of the bombers, you still don't necessarily can justify breaking into his house to put a listening device in there.
Right.
So it is what it is. It's just judge it in the context of the day.
And again, this is September 1963. And again, 63, the FBI is pretty busy because after this bombing, within just a few months, you're going to have the JFK assassination.
Yes.
And then just weeks after that, you're going to have the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra's son.
The Sinatra kidnapping, and then even just really less than a year later, you had the Mississippi burning case in Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers were killed. So yes, this was a very, very turbulent time, and so
the FBI is busy.
They're super busy at this time. Yeah.
So now we're moving ahead to 1971. And now the Alabama Attorney General office, they reopen this case.
Yes.
And they request the evidence from the FBI, and they request the files from the FBI. And one of their big pushes to reopen it is they feel that it's been several years now, and the fear that witnesses had for not coming forward, they now will come forward.
Yeah, because let's face it, the times have changed. There was a lot of society had changed a lot in those few years. Attitudes about race, thankfully,
have
changed, and it was just a much more maybe appropriate time to do this because, again, justice will find a way to be served, and this particular crime was so horrific, you just couldn't let justice not be served in it.
And really, you have to think about, at the time, if you were a witness to this in 1963 and you witnessed what they did to a church
Yes.
and killed people,
Yeah.
if you came forward and pointed fingers or told what you knew,
Yeah.
you could be the next victim.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think that fear...
That was a valid fear at the time. It really was. But I think by the early 90s, a lot of that had, just viewpoints had changed, frankly. And, the people that still held these kind of extreme radical thoughts were fewer and fewer in number, and they certainly didn't have the control or the power that they did in 1963.
So again, 1971, the state reopens this case, and now this is where something really weird happens in November of 1976.
Yeah.
Is that Dynamite Bob, this guy Chambliss,
Yeah.
he goes to the Birmingham Police Department to discuss the recent arrest of a subject.
Okay.
This subject had nothing to do with bombing, and so Dynamite Bob goes to the police department on his own will.
Yeah.
He shows up. The police officers are sort of shocked that he's there, and he comes in and he sits down and he talks with them for almost an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And in what he's talking about is he's saying, hey, this guy that you have just arrested, he was involved when I was arrested in 1963 with the dynamite.
Yeah. Okay.
And then he starts, in the same conversation, he starts talking about the construction of a bomb. And he says, a fellow once told me to make a bomb, you use the drip method. And that is, you have a bucket of water, a fishing bobber, and there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket. And again, these officers aren't questioning him. He's just
offering this up.
He's just offering this up. And what I want to add on that is right after the bombing in 1963, there is an FBI agent who finds a fishing bobber at the scene.
No kidding.
Yes.
Okay.
He finds that.
That, folks, is what we call a clue.
Right. But at the time that he found in 63, they had no idea why this
they didn't know what the relevance of it was. Yes.
Right. So in September of 1977, a grand jury is seated to hear testimony concerning the involvement of Dynamite Bob in this bombing.
Yeah, yeah.
And on September 24th, 1977,
Yep.
there was an indictment is issued charging him with the murder of Carol Denise McNair.
And all based on this voluntary statement that he gave, where he talks about how you make a bomb using a fishing bobber and the fact that there was one found at the scene.
But also, at this time, this grand jury got to see some of the FBI files.
Yes.
And got to read some of the witnesses that the FBI had
talked to at the time.
So all this was part of that grand jury that gets him indicted for the murder.
So effectively, at the time, Todd, the FBI really had narrowed it down and knew that it was these four guys, Chambliss and Cherry and the other two.
Yes.
And so they had a very detailed file on these guys. And so now that becomes relevant in,
like you said, the murder
later.
Because there is no statute of limitations on murder.
Exactly.
So during his trial down there, the Reverend that was the pastor of the church at the time of the bombing, he's going to testify. And he testifies that this explosion goes off. He says the whole building shakes. He thinks the building's going to collapse. And he starts to, once he gets his bearings and figures out where he's at, he starts to get people evacuated out of the church building.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think in his testimony, he's going to say there's between 150 to 200 people in the church at the time.
Yep. Well, it made a gigantic hole in the wall of this church. You can see it. It was so I don't doubt one bit that it shook that place, and they probably thought this whole thing's coming down.
And again, during his testimony, he's evacuating these people out of there, and now he realizes that there were children in the basement.
Oh, man.
And so he tries to go to the stairs that lead down the basement, but they've been destroyed.
Yeah.
So he actually has to exit outside the church, and then he goes through the
hole
in
through
the wall.
that hole in the wall. Yeah.
He goes in there along with some other people, and they start digging in all this debris, and they find a body of one of the young girls.
Yeah.
And then they continue searching, keep on digging.
It's just absolutely heartbreaking.
And they end up finding all 4 bodies.
Yeah.
Within minutes of finding those bodies, they start to hear moaning and crying, and they start digging and digging and digging, and that's when they find Sarah Collins.
Yeah.
And she's actually trapped inside one of the restroom stalls.
Yeah.
During this trial, witnesses are going to testify that Chambliss had possession of dynamite in the summer of 1963, and that he supposedly had made comments that he was going to give this dynamite to Klan members.
Yeah. Well, even though he was convicted in this trial of illegal possession of dynamite, it's still there's still the evidence that he has dynamite
right before the bombing.
Right at the time of the bombing is so relevant. I don't care what really the result of that trial was.
Right. Because in the murder trial now that's going on, there's a neighbor that testifies that she accidentally discovered some of the dynamite right before the bombing inside his house.
Yeah.
Another witness is going to say that the night before the bombing, she is going to see Chambliss inside Blanton's car.
Okay.
At the scene.
Yeah, and that
before the bombing.
Right.
She actually, at this time, she lives in Michigan, but she was born and grew up in Birmingham. She goes back there for vacations.
Mm-hmm.
So she just happened to be on her vacation down there when the bombing happened.
Yeah.
But the FBI meet with her up in Detroit in 1963. They meet with her. They show her a book of photographs, and she picks Chambliss out.
Right.
And says, that's the guy that was in the car. And she actually, through photographs, picks out Blanton's car.
Right.
And says, that's the car that I saw there.
She sees the car
that
at
night.
the park there at the church.
Right. But again, the state authorities, Alabama, who's prosecuting this murder trial, they don't know of this witness in the 1960s. They don't get this until the 1970s when they have their new grand jury for the murder, that they get part of these files from the FBI at that time.
Yeah.
And so this lady actually comes down and testifies in this trial. And then, I mentioned earlier that Chambliss had a nephew on the police department that went there that morning.
Yep.
So now this nephew will testify at his murder trial, but this time the nephew will testify that he doesn't recall telling FBI agents that I think my uncle had something to do with this bombing. He testifies that, hey, I didn't tell any police officers that my uncle, I just went to my uncle's house to get a shotgun.
Okay. So, okay. See, that's somewhat illogical because, at the time you would think he would have been more protective of his uncle and might have been more of that mindset in 63 and would have softened those views by, but in later years, instead of the opposite, it seems.
But I think, again, this falls right into what, the director of the FBI had talked about at that time, is that people aren't going to come to testify.
Yeah.
They may have witnessed something, they may have known something, but they're not going to testify to it.
Yep.
But the star witness in this Chambliss murder trial is going to be his niece.
Yeah.
And his niece is going to say that she heard these incriminating statements that Chambliss made before the bombing and after the bombing.
Yeah.
And one of these statements was in regards to the timing of the bombing, that Chambliss had said that bomb should have went off at night. It shouldn't have went off in the morning time.
Yeah.
And then I think there's another time that she testifies that she says just days following the bombing, Chambliss is sitting in a room looking at a TV, and the newscaster is talking about the bombing, and she hears Chambliss say that it wasn't meant to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
It didn't go off when it was supposed to.
Right.
He kind of yells this at the TV. She overhears this.
Well, that may be true, and it does seem to fit, with the pattern of these other bombings that happened, in and around Birmingham at the time, where there weren't any injuries and just property was destroyed. But that to me that doesn't really mitigate much, because look, if you're planting dynamite in a church or if you're planting dynamite anywhere where human beings are going to be,
there's a good chance somebody
exactly. Yes.
So again, in this murder trial, the victim is Carol Denise McNair. So just days after, which would have been her 26th birthday,
yes,
the jury comes back and they find Chambliss guilty of murder.
Awesome.
And he's given a life sentence in prison. He serves about 8 years of this sentence when he dies in prison. And that's 1985.
Okay.
He passes away. Now, in 1983, there's a young film student by the name of Spike Lee.
Spike Lee, okay.
And he's going to NYU Film School.
Yeah.
He reaches out to the McNair family and says, I would like to do a movie about your daughter.
Yes.
And the family does not give him permission to do
And, I'm surprised, too, that there, honestly, Todd, that there haven't been, over the years, more movies and documentaries about this case, just because, like I said, to me, it's just such a tragedy that these young ladies were killed, for no reason at all. But anyway, so Spike Lee, he wants to do a documentary.
He wants to do a documentary on it. The family says no. Now I think the year is about 1994, and one of the conspirators is that Herman Frank Cash. He passes away.
Yeah.
So now there's just two that are remaining. Now somewhere in the mid 1990s, by now Spike Lee is pretty well known for his movies.
Yeah, yeah.
And reaches back out to
at
the
this
family.
point. He's probably sitting, on the floor of the Lakers games, with Jack Nicholson and okay,
yeah. Although I think he was more of a New York team sitting up there.
Was he? Okay,
yeah,
maybe so. You're right. You're right.
He's more of a New York.
I just remember seeing Spike Lee at basketball games,
Yes.
sitting on the floor.
Yeah, he follows a New York team.
Okay,
so he gets permission from the family to make this, and it turns out to be a documentary.
Yeah.
And so on July 9th, 1997, his movie is released.
Okay.
The movie actually will be nominated for an Academy Award for the year 1988.
You mean 98?
1998.
Yeah.
The movie will become a nominee for documentary in 1998.
Sure.
So again, it premieres on July 10th, 1997. The very next day, July 10th, 1997, the FBI reopens their investigation.
Okay. Now, is that a coincidence, or do you think it was because they saw, that hey, here's a famous case, or and we can take advantage of that, people are interested in it now?
That's probably it.
maybe witnesses will come forward or whatever.
The FBI reopens their investigation,
and I will say, Todd, that for better or for worse, sometimes cases that are opened by the FBI are as a result of something with it that had media attention.
And that's probably exactly what happened here. Because, again, Bobby Frank Cherry and Thomas Blanton, they're the only two that are remaining from this. And which is kind of unique is that when the FBI makes this known that they've reopened this case, that Cherry himself then, he's tired of reporters coming to his house, that he holds a press conference.
Yeah.
And in his press conference, he denies any involvement in this bombing.
Okay. Yeah. That's not surprising.
Right. But unfortunately for him, that during his press conference, there are new witnesses that view his press conference, and they come forward with more information and new information for the FBI.
Exactly.
And over the next 3 years, the state, Alabama, they're working their case against these two. And in May of 2000, Alabama state authorities, they bring charges on these two remaining conspirators. And they are indicted for murder of the 4 girls.
Blanton and Cherry.
Right.
Yep.
And now the state is going to try their trial at the same time. Both guys are going to get tried at the same time for this murder. However, Cherry starts to have medical problems, and so his trial gets postponed. And now they're getting ready for Blanton's trial.
Yeah.
And the state of Alabama, those authorities there, reach out to the FBI one more time to say, hey, look, we're about to go to trial, murder against Blanton. Did you give us everything that there is?
Right.
And at this time, the FBI finds a box of audio recordings. And these recordings were picked up from a microphone that has been placed under the kitchen sink in Blanton's house.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Back in 1963.
Right. So it's these questionably admissible recordings.
Right. So apparently an FBI agent who's posing as undercover as a truck driver.
Yeah.
He lives next door to Blanton. And he drills a hole through the wall into Blanton's residence.
Yeah.
And he sticks this microphone through there, and they just record hours and hours and hours and hours of conversation.
Okay.
And all these recordings have been kept all these years. They're in a box, and the FBI found them at this time, and an agent listens to them all.
Okay.
And in one of these recordings, Blanton is having a conversation with his wife, and he discusses the bombing.
What's he say?
Well, in April of 2001, he goes on trial for the murder, and the jury gets to listen to these audio recordings.
Okay.
Where he talks about that the Friday before the bombing, they were at a sign shop in Birmingham, and that's when the bomb was constructed.
Okay.
At the sign shop.
Friday before in a sign shop.
Right.
Yeah.
He's having a discussion with his wife, and when she says, "I thought you stood me up that night," and he says, "No, that's the night that we built the bomb."
Okay.
Over there.
Wow.
And so when the jury hears this,
sure.
So
again, and no doubt in the course of that trial, the admissibility of that recording, I'm sure, was challenged by Blanton's attorneys. And so whatever maybe the arguments were, obviously the judge allowed it.
Right.
So again, that to me tells me that for the time, the Bureau followed the correct procedure that would have been legal in 63.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so again, the jury convicts him, and he is sentenced to life in prison.
Yeah.
Now, in May of 2002, Bobby Frank Cherry goes on trial.
Yeah.
And during his trial, the recording from Blanton's kitchen are used also. And again, at that time, I think, same thing what you just said, defense attorney says, you can't do this.
Yeah.
But I think the judge rules that Cherry has no legal standing in those recordings.
Because it's really not against him.
Yeah, it wasn't his house.
I mean, the issue of a wiretap, or what we call a Title III, is really it's a huge invasion of privacy. But that can be overcome by if you show a probable cause that they're going to talk about a crime and they're involved in a crime, and so you can overcome their privacy rights because of that. But in this case, Cherry had no privacy rights to what Blanton is being recorded for.
And again, in that recording, it's Blanton saying that on Friday night at the sign shop, that's the night that we made the bombing.
Right.
That's what he tells his wife. In the FBI file, there is a handwritten note from an agent who interviewed Cherry just days after the bombing. At the time, in 1963, just after the bombing.
Yeah.
And he asked Cherry about his whereabouts that Friday night. And Cherry said, between 5:30 and midnight, I was at the sign shop.
Oh, okay.
So,
I'm sure he didn't say, and we were making a bomb.
Right. No,
he didn't say that,
he didn't
right?
Say that. But when the jury heard the tape,
yes,
saw the notes from the FBI,
exactly.
Cherry's convicted.
Yes,
and he's sentenced to life in prison.
Okay.
And again, that's May 2002 when he's convicted, sentenced to his life sentence, and just a little over 2 years later, Cherry passes away in prison.
Yeah.
Now, moving forward, I think in August of 2016, Blanton's the only one that's alive.
Still in jail, but alive, yeah.
But actually, he goes up for a parole. Now, the parole board denies him his parole in 2016, and 4 years later, in 2020, he's going to pass away at the age of 82.
Yeah.
And, so I think you mentioned this earlier about, justice finally being served.
Yeah.
It's almost 40 years later.
Yeah.
And it's finally done.
Yeah. I know there are cases out there, where people got away with things. But, you just have to have, I think, a belief, if not, just a faith that that good will ultimately win out.
Right.
And I think this is just a great example. This case is a great example of that.
And again, that the FBI was able to maintain these audio recordings all these years and the files all those years, that they weren't destroyed,
Sure,
or they weren't lost or anything like that.
Right.
They were preserved.
Yep.
Now, earlier in the show, I mentioned that one of us had a personal association with this case. So, again, in April of 2001, after being indicted by the state of Alabama, an arrest warrant is issued for Bobby Frank Cherry.
Bobby Frank Cherry, yeah.
And so tell me what happened with that.
So, at that time, I was in the Tyler, Texas office of the FBI. It's called the Resident Agency. It's just a small satellite office out of Dallas. And part of our territory that we covered out of Tyler involved an area. There's an area called Cedar Creek Lake. It's a lake community. And I guess the nearest town to this lake community would be what's called Maybank, Texas. And so Cedar Creek Lake and Maybank was in, our territory, our area of jurisdiction. And I received a lead, what we call a lead from, another office from Birmingham, to initially go out and serve a subpoena on Bobby Frank Cherry. And, for this ongoing case that Birmingham had. So I guess he had. I'm not sure how long he had actually lived, here in Texas, but he'd retired, and I guess was living the retired life out here on Cedar Creek Lake, and so I located where he lived, went out and served the subpoena on him. No, there was without incident, nothing happened. I want to say he was aware of it. He knew it was coming.
Right. Yeah, he had,
and he knew
this
this
press conference.
Yeah, he'd already had the press conference and everything. So, this was not a big shock to him. And again, he accepted the subpoena without incident. There was no hard feelings, no animosity, no nothing. It's just, hey, here's your subpoena. So I documented the report that the subpoena had been served on him, sent it back to Birmingham, and kind of just forgot it. I closed that lead out, and that was it. So I don't remember exactly when that was. Maybe late 2000 or early 2001, and then a few months later, sure enough, the grand jury, the grand jury had issued an indictment for Cherry and Blanton, and they had an arrest warrant that that they wanted served on Cherry. And so, the lead comes to me because I'd already had the lead to serve the subpoena, on Cherry. And so I grabbed another agent, Jeff Block, in our office. And Jeff actually, we've had a discussion about this before. Jeff remembered that he was the one that had the lead, but Jeff and I, we just have to agree to disagree on it. But because I know I'm the one that served the subpoena, and he was not involved in that. And so logically, I'd already had that lead, and so I just got the next one. But anyway, without a doubt, Jeff and I went out there to where it was, and then we hooked up with some local officers from the Henderson County Sheriff's Office, because this was out in the county where it was. And so we had probably 5 or 6 law enforcement officers. We go to Cherry's home, which I recall was like a trailer or a manufactured type home. It was not junky. It was not run down. But on the other hand, it wasn't real fancy. It wasn't real ostentatious or anything. So knock on the door. Cherry himself comes to the door, and and he's an older guy. He wasn't frail or anything like that, but he was somewhat slower. I mean, just an older guy. Told him that he was under arrest. He did not, again, without incident, he did not put up any resistance whatsoever. One of the things you do is each arrest is a little different, and you can tell when someone is cooperative and what their attitude is then you...
So he cooperated?
Completely. And so you act accordingly. You know, in other words, there's no need to be rough or to do anything with somebody that is acknowledging, okay, I'm under arrest, I'm cooperating. So, you know, it's one of those things where regardless of how much they're cooperating, you still want to search them,
right?
You know, before you put them in the car or, you know, you engage them in any way. So, you know, I just said, and one of the first things you do is ask, hey, do you have any weapons on you, or do you have anything that's going to hurt me if I touch you? And he goes, well, the only thing I've got is I keep a pistol in my pocket. I'm like, okay, that could hurt me, so I need to get that. So I reached in his pocket, and I said, where is it? He said, it's in my pocket. So I reached in his pocket, and I pulled it out. It was a very small...
in his front pants pocket.
Front pants pocket.
Okay.
It was a small .22 caliber pistol. And so... you know, as I sit here now, I honestly don't remember what we did with that. Probably just left it
at the house.
At his house. You know, because it wasn't anything for him that he couldn't have. He's at his own house, and so, you know, then put handcuffs on him, patted him down.
Let me just stop you right there.
Yeah.
Again, for our listeners, in case you just missed that.
Oh,
Stewart, you are the FBI agent that puts the handcuffs.
Yes.
On Terry.
So again, if we go back to the friendly disagreement I've had over the years with the other FBI agent as to who necessarily had the lead assigned to them on this, I still say it was me. But regardless of whoever the lead was assigned to, I put the cuffs on Bobby Frank Cherry. We put him, you know, in the car, driving back to the courthouse, and you know, from there he
was in custody.
Has been in custody ever since. You know, let me put it this way. He never saw freedom again. He had a hearing. So, you know, because it's going to be an extradition kind of thing.
Right.
So he had to go back to the courthouse because that's where my engagement in this case ended. We took him to the courthouse. And so again, it's kind of at that point, it was a state to state matter.
Now, moreover than just being the FBI agent that puts the handcuffs on Cherry,
yeah,
you also have another close personal association with this case.
Yeah, I do, and I'll try to get through it as best I can to try to explain it. But you know, when you go through life, you know, and you take a certain career, you always, at least I did, and I think a lot of people have the same experience in life. Is, you know, you just wonder, did I choose the right career? Have I, you know, what do I want to do when I grow up? And even though I was well into my 30s at that point, you know, I still thought, you know, when you're young, you think, man, I'm going to be a race car driver. I'm going to be a movie star. I'm going to be an architect,
a pro golfer,
you know, and all these things, you know, that there's no limits on what's possible. And I think, honestly, I was still young enough and naive enough that I still had those thoughts about, you know, am I in the right place in life? Am I in the right career? You know, what am I going to do when I grow up?
Right.
And so, you know, so I still at that time kind of had those thoughts in general about life. And as it turns out, the day that this church was bombed, it was a Sunday, and I might have to take my time through this.
Take your time.
Yeah, it was a Sunday, and it happened to be the day I was born.
Wow.
And you know, for me, it was it hit me as far as how much, what are the odds that you know, a baby born that day would grow up to, you know, become an FBI agent, to be assigned in an office where, you know, one of these bombers was, and that, you know, on a case that easily could have probably been forgotten and, you know, never looked at again. You know, that
you're the one that put the handcuffs on him.
Yeah. And, you know, where these four young girls were just brutally murdered for no reason. And so to just have a part in that, you know, it really hit me hard that
This is where you belong.
Exactly. This is where I need to be. And I just really, from that day forward, I never had another thought about,
Leaving the
what
FBI.
what am I going to do when I grow up? Because it just told me I'm in the right place. And so I'm very proud to have had just a small part, in this case and bringing justice to this case, even though honestly, it was of all the arrests I made in my career, this was right up there with one of the easiest.
Right.
But it still, to me, I'm very proud of it, and it has a very, very special meaning for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that.
Yes.
And always, to our listeners, again, thank you so much for listening. Hit that subscribe button, follow button, share with your friends.
Please, it helps us out so much, guys. We love doing this for you. We really like researching these cases, looking through these old files. It's a lot of fun for us. So hit us up with some of your thoughts and ideas, and we'll track it down.
Yeah, if you have any comments on this, reach out to us, and we'll get them answered. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot. This has been the Back in Crime podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers Todd Hiles and Stewart Fillmore. We are the executive producers. Grace Hiles is the producer and director. Theme music composed by Eddie Bandas. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel at Texas Crime Travelers.